Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Today, I have joined with me on the other line Kyle Reenders. Kyle is a name that's probably familiar to most of you. Kyle is our producer and editor, and well, he does just about everything that you see on the screen when you're watching one of our web shows. Kyle, how's it going tonight?
Doing pretty good. Can't complain.
Well, Todd does not know that we're doing this, other than the fact that we posted something on Facebook about asking you questions. So it's going to be a bit of a surprise to him Monday morning when this launches. But I wanted to start the show off really putting you on the spot, and I can imagine you're wiggling in your chair right now, wondering what I'm going to ask. And I'm going to ask, what exactly is it like? And we all know how crazy Todd can really be. What's it like being his cameraman? And, you've done this for a long time now, 10 years. What's it like being his cameraman and following him around? I know in recent years with families growing, etc., you haven't been able to spend as much time with him, but what's it like?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. I feel like I better be careful in what I say if I want to keep my job, right? But,
everything's
honestly,
fair game.
It is.
Katie gave us permission.
Okay, well, as long as she's good with it, that's fine. It is crazy to look back and think that it's been over 10 years that we've been doing this, and I think there's so much that I've learned in the process, and really, at this point, it's really become second nature. But I mean, I think being in the tree with Todd is very much a lot like what you would think it would be, from what you see from his reactions and everything going in. And I think one of the reasons that we've been able to stick together for the last 10 years is that we have very different personalities. He's, the outgoing, energetic guy, and I'm kind of the laid back, don't really say much, which I think is what makes me a good cameraman. But it's been a lot of fun over the last 10 years to just chase deer through the woods. Starting off 10 years ago, I would go down to Iowa and I would be down there for 4 months from filming and then into editing and that sort of thing. And like you said, the last couple of years with, getting married, having a family, it's been less and less. And so he's been doing more self-filming, but still involved with all the editing. And I think it's just, it's been a fun journey.
Yeah, well, things have, like everything, have evolved and changed. And certainly when I came to that first film school and you were explaining what white balancing meant, and I don't even know that anybody white balances a camera anymore, do they?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I usually use some of the presets more to find what I'm looking for, but it's definitely not as critical as it used to be on some of those old GL2s, carrying around a white card and putting it in front of the camera and pushing a little button and waiting for it to be all good. So I just don't. The one thing I don't miss is tapes. That is something that I will never miss.
So what would you say in the 10 years that you've been on this journey? First of all, let's back up for a second. Tell our listeners who may not know and who may not have heard the Kyle Reenders story, but how did you get involved in this to begin with? Young guy, grew up in Western Michigan there. How in the world did you ever get involved in filming? Certainly you had to have some art in your background, would be my guess, but how did it all get started, and how did you end up doing this?
Yeah, so I had, in 2005, I had just graduated from Full Sail University in Florida with a associate's degree in film and video production. Was kind of deciding what I wanted to do, and I had gone out to LA and worked on a couple of short films, and really just decided that living in Los Angeles was not what I wanted to do with my life. And so at that point, I was kind of figuring out, where do I fit in? What do I want to do? And what do I want to chase? And at the same time, I was having I think it was like a summer archery shooting, just kind of just gearing up for the season with a a mutual friend of Todd and mine. And he just, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you should go ahead and talk to my buddy Todd. He's looking to start a production company." And I was like, okay, so I called him up and we talked. I mean, I should say he talked probably, but and and then ended up going down there, and we did some summer scouting, some summer hanging some tree stands, and I probably thought, man, this guy is nuts. And I think I still believe that to this day, but
and you're right.
And so it's been, yeah. And so, so we went out and we hunted in Illinois and Iowa that first year and put together our first DVD, Beyond the Kill, and haven't really looked back since, I guess.
So you mentioned that you were in LA and you filmed a couple of short films. So you were running a camera and participating actively in this whole filming process for these, I'm assuming, movies or whatever they may be.
Yeah, so there were 2 short films that I worked on when I was in LA, and I was the camera assistant. So basically, my job was to load all the film. Back in the days, I mean, film still gets used, but not as much as it used to. So my job was to load film into the magazines, 1,000 feet at a time, and then unload them and put them in the canisters, and then really then whatever else the actual cameraman wanted me to do. And so that's kind of how you work your way up through the system. That's the place you start if you're going to do the camera side of things. And so I worked on a couple films, and one of them went on to win some awards, which was kind of cool to be a part of it.
As things have progressed along the course of the 10 years, definitely things have changed. What's changed the most in terms of a couple different things? Let's break it down if we could. What's changed the most in terms of the technology? We'll start off there.
Man, I think when you think about that, I just think the quality is probably the thing that comes out, first and foremost in my mind, and just what you can get for the amount of money compared to, back in the day when we had standard definition, you recorded the tapes, and now, I mean, you have footage that you can get on a tiny little GoPro. That's way better than anything we could, on a $3,000 camera back in the day. I remember the first time, I got an HD camera. It was actually right before the hunting season. I got it because I knew I was going to be spending a month out in Iowa, and it was like, that was just kind of eye-opening to just see that footage. And when you're used to kind of some grain and some just pixelation on some of the old footage, because that's all we could do, and then just to see the HD, and of course now we have 4K, and it just keeps growing and growing exponentially, and that's probably the biggest advancement, I would say.
Is the 4K definitely, and so yeah. For any of you out there that wonder, and we get questions like this all the time, what exactly does 4K accomplish that 1080p HD doesn't accomplish, other than being a little bit crisper, maybe to the untrained eye? I don't know that I can see a tremendous difference, but from an editing standpoint, what does that change anything?
Yeah, so I will say, if you think about 4K, so 4K is 4 times the definition. So if you think you have 1080, which is standard definition, regular high definition, and so you could fit 4 of those frames inside of 4K. And so, to be honest, there's not a lot. I mean, most of what we do is online, and so 4K really doesn't make a difference there. But the big advantage that I have with 4K cameras is being able to zoom in post-production when I'm editing, and get a little closer on some of the shots and not have it pixelate, not have it the quality diminish. And so that's been a big game changer on, especially when you have Todd, who's got a 4K camera, who's doing some self-filming, and now when he's self-filming, he doesn't have to worry about zooming in so much, on a deer as it's coming through, because that's something I can do while I'm editing, which has really made, it's just really cool to see that advancement and your quality of footage stepping up with that.
Yeah, definitely. That is an absolute game changer for, people that sell film. I remember when we first started the film schools, or when you guys first started having the film schools, we went down and Todd was like absolutely, and I think even you were probably part of that that I guess school of thought. It was that you had to have a cameraman, and certainly having a cameraman has its advantages. But, things like 4K have made it easier to film yourself. And not that filming yourself is anything close to easy, but it's made it easier. And it allows you basically to, if I'm not mistaken, just not, zoom in on a deer and have to worry about it being focused and those types of things. You can, like you said, post-production, pull that shot in a little closer if you want to, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think technology has made it a little bit easier to do some self-filming, but I think also we've had kind of a mental shift on that process too, whereas, sometimes I think Todd's come to enjoy self-filming and the challenge of it just as much as he has, when I've been in a tree with him.
Yeah, it definitely adds an element that, I didn't try it until last year. And, the stars really all have to align in order for that whole, that whole plan to work out. It really something special has to take place, because I know that, in the tight quarters that I seem to hunt in, or in the past, it would have taken nothing short of a miracle for all of those stars to align. And lo and behold, yeah. David and I ended up last year. You played our show already this year, but we had that one really nice. I don't remember if it's an 8-pointer or 10-pointer come in, and that would have been the most perfect situation for self filming. But I was actually filming Dave that day, but. So let's talk real quick about since you've been with Todd so long, what's the biggest change that you've noticed outside of him owning his own farm? What are some of the changes that you've seen in the way that you guys hunt as he's evolved as a hunter, as you've watched him evolve as a hunter? And
I think a big thing that has changed, and I guess him personally too, but also in the way that he hunts, is he's kind of chilled out a little bit, which may not seem like it sometimes on camera, but I think, and that's kind of come with some age and some wisdom, and also just the caliber of deer that we and he is chasing now is kind of, we've kind of raised the level every year. I think the first couple of years, if you look, he was kind of always anxious to seem to just kind of get something. And now he just, sometimes I just admire the patience that he has to, let some of these deer go and say, okay, that's not the one we're going after. So I think that's kind of been a big change, which is really cool, because some of the best footage, some of the coolest footage that we've captured is in those moments where you let a buck walk and you're able to just get some amazing footage that you wouldn't have got otherwise if you just shot him.
What's your most favorite white knuckle memory, or what's the most favorite film that you've laid down that any of the people that are listening may or may not have seen?
I think it still has to be the night we shot Barry Sanders. Just because, first Barry comes in and we shoot him, and then he runs off, and then 15 minutes later, the buck that we now know as Rusty Nail comes in, and we are able, he's within 15 yards, and we're able to get some amazing footage. He goes away, and then he comes back and does a scrape, and then he goes right downwind. So we're able to get a really cool Ozonics shot, with the wind going right to him, and you can see the puffer that Todd lets go, and he's over there like throwing a whole ton of it out. And that was just another example of kind of some footage that we wouldn't have gotten before had we not shot him, because he only had one tag. So then obviously we're not going to shoot the Rusty Nail, but we were able to get some really cool footage that we wouldn't have gotten if we hadn't already killed Barry Sanders.
So what's it like I know what it's like, but for people that don't know, you do hunt, right?
Yeah. I've been doing more hunting the last couple of years, because when we first started, I mean, everyone was always like, do you hunt? That's kind of the one question I get all the time. Do you hunt on your own? And honestly, the first number of years, I didn't, just because I was down in Iowa for 3 months. So when was I going to hunt? But lately, the last couple of years, I've been getting the, turkey hunting a little more and deer hunting. And for me, it's because I've had the time to be back in Michigan and do that. And for me, honestly, people ask that question, and to me, it's kind of like, well, I'm hunting when I'm out there. I'm just shooting them with a camera and not with a bow. And so for me, I mean, it's just as much of a rush to be doing that as it is if I'm able to shoot them with a bow. And really, I always joke and say, well, Todd gets 1-2 tags a year, but every time we go out, I shoot something. So
that's the cool part of being a cameraman. There's always something to do. As much as the show's about getting a deer, a cameraman can really make the show a really good, take a good show to being a great show, and just make it a whole lot more enjoyable. And on that note, what, for folks that are getting into this or may already be into it, what advice would you have for people that are sitting up in a tree, and maybe they're filming themselves, but they want to be creative? What advice do you give in the film schools? And I can't remember right off the top of my head, but what advice do you give to people when they're not filming a deer coming in?
Did you not pay attention when we had the film school earlier this summer?
Dude, I was doing the other segment.
All right, you're off the hook, I guess. For me, I think the biggest thing that makes a story unique and really pulls you in and gets your attention is having supporting footage, which is what we would call B-roll. And so what that is anything, squirrels running through the forest, or birds, or you see a fox, or even a leaf, or anything that catches your eye, to kind of tell the story of because when you're in the woods, you're not just out there to get the kill. Being part of hunting is just sitting out in the woods and enjoying nature and looking around and just being in the middle of it all. And so part of that, but also filming stuff, as you're going into the stand, as you're coming out. And so it's not, anyone can get up and just do an interview, and that's really boring to just see an interview for 2 minutes. But if you have these different small clips that you can continue to cut to as you're telling your story, you got to think of it as you're going to tell your story in your interview, but then you also visually tell your story with these little clips that you can get throughout your hunts and throughout when you're out in the woods. Is
there anything more that you'd like to add to anything that we've talked about? Well,
I think another big part of filming is being creative in the angles that you can get. Because if you think about the world that we see when we're looking at it from, I got 5'4", you guys might differ, but you're always looking at it from your angle. And so to be able to get a shot that's maybe low on the ground if some boots walking by, or you're going to get a shot from up above. And I think that's one of the reasons, like if you look at how drones have just taken off, I think a big part of that is just because it's that different angle that we don't see every day. And so it just makes everything that much cooler when you can see it from a drone, and you don't have to have a drone to get cool shots. That's not what I'm saying. But I think just be constantly thinking to try and do a different shot, so everything's not always the same.
Yeah, drones have definitely they've taken over. They haven't taken over, but they certainly play a much larger role than any of us have ever imagined that they would. I did a podcast earlier in the year with Tom Dokken, and he actually uses drones to train his labs. And what he's done is designed some sort of mechanical device that will drop a dummy, a training dummy, in the water, in the field. So he'll have someone fly that drone in, and, that teaches the dog then to look up in the air. So it's pretty incredible what drones have done. And I mean, they even have huge drones that would, not huge, but pretty large drones that would, like you can put a DSLR on them, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's a guy on YouTube that I follow that earlier this year, he created a drone that picked him up off the ground. So, I mean, there you go. He did this whole like snowboard video where they were flying through the mountains, and then it would like pick them up off of jumps, and it was nuts. So they haven't taken over yet, but they might in the future. You got to watch out.
Right, exactly. You got to watch out. In those early days when you guys were filming, I remember you guys used to film in Illinois as well, right?
Yeah, yep. We did, I don't know, the first 4 or 5 years maybe, we would spend time. It was really before, once Todd got his property, then we stopped filming because then he could get the landowner tag.
Oh,
but
sure.
For the first 4 or 5 years, we filmed in Illinois and Iowa at the same time.
What was the biggest difference in between the two? Obviously from where I sit, there's a huge difference between Illinois and Iowa, but from you were down there, you got to see it. I've never hunted Illinois and I've never hunted Iowa. I've just seen the videos. What's the biggest difference or notable difference that you saw in between those two?
I think the biggest difference was, I mean, Illinois was just so, I mean, that was the place to be. And so what he had to, pay to lease in Illinois was probably a lesser quality than what he could hunt in Iowa from knocking on doors at that point, And so I think that was a big part of it. We spent 4 or 5 years hunting Illinois, and we got one shot at a buck that we didn't end up finding, but that was definitely, it was just harder, I guess. I don't know. It just seemed, and that totally could have been where we were at. I don't know, but and everyone thinks that you go to Iowa and deer just come running out of everywhere, and that is not the case. You still have to work your butt off for it. It's still, luck, and it's still being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, that's probably the difference that I would see.
That brings up a good point. So you've hunted in Michigan, not in Iowa. You filmed in obviously in both places and in Illinois. Is there, again, you're right. A lot of people have the misconception that you just drive to Iowa, cross the border, and get out of the car, and there's Boone and Crockett bucks running everywhere. and I went down there shed hunting this year for the first time, and I expected to get out of the truck, when we parked it down by the river there, and there just be sheds lining the field. I didn't find a shed the whole day. Todd found several, but I think, he put me in the bad spots. But, having been in both of those places, is there that much of a difference outside of the obvious things like the quality of the deer or the quality maybe of the rack? Let's call it that. Is there that much difference?
Well, and I think it just depends on, obviously, where I'm hunting in Michigan and where I'm about. There just isn't as much crops. I mean, where I hunt is up north at my parents' place, and so it's just all it's part of right by the national forest, and so it's just a lot of forest. So obviously that creates different aspects than if you're hunting around food sources and that sort of thing. But I don't know. It's definitely interesting to see I don't know if there's anything that really jumps out at me too much as far as differences from where I've been. And I think that's kind of the cool part about white-tailed deer is that even for me, going out and getting a doe it's just cool to see and to have that opportunity,
Yeah, absolutely. So as we were talking there, a question popped into my head. What has kept you having? Let me back up. As we were talking, a question popped into my head, and having been in the business now, it's about a year since I took over the position that I had, or that I have. What's kept you doing this for this long? Because I know it's not the money.
No, that's not. I don't know. I think it's just the love
Todd?
of, the love of Todd, yes. The love of just going and sitting in the woods. I mean, what other job can you get paid to just go sit in the woods and video deer? I mean, even if it's not that much, like you said, but it's been good enough to make an honest living for me, and really, I think that's just the biggest part is enjoying nature. You know, for me, it's like, if you think about all the guys that save up all the vacation time so they can go on their hunting trip, like, I get to do that for work. And so I just think that's a cool aspect and something that I've been blessed to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something to be said for having that luxury. There's no question about that. When we talk about you know, going down to Iowa, how much time is it that you guys actually spend in the tree? You got to be honest with me now and tell me, does Todd really get up at dark 30 and crawl through the woods in the dark and shimmy up a tree when you're around, or do y'all sleep into like 10, 8, whatever the case may be? Because if I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I were, I would say Todd's not one to crawl out of bed very early. Just give us the score there.
Yeah, so usually we sleep in until about 10, and then we go out for a good breakfast, and then try and be in the stand by 1. And no, honestly, he is not a morning person, like you will say. He absolutely hates it. But there is a rare morning that we do not, you know, get up and go out. We're usually be in the stand at least half an hour. Depends on if you got to get everything set up, 45 minutes, an hour before light, depending on the situation too. If you're sneaking in real close to where you think a buck's going to be bedded. But yeah, so, I mean, we go out every morning and every night. And I think I kind of guilt him into it when I'm down there, because he's like, well, Kyle's down here. What are we going to do? Just sit back here and twiddle our thumbs? So I think he's kind of forced a little bit in that way. But yeah, we do spend a lot of time out in the woods.
What's it like following him in the timber, whether it's dark or not? I just, in my head, I'm thinking about trying to live up to his standards, and his standards are high, correct?
Yeah, you have to be a timber ninja. There's a rigorous training that you have to
Well, no, that doesn't surprise me. I'm sure he puts you through some sort of boot camp before you even made the cut to be the cameraman.
I'm sure, you know, when we started 10 years ago, I'm sure he was, well, as a matter of fact, he's told me that he was like, after the first day that we went out, he was ready to throw the camera and me out of the tree. Just because he was like, what did I get myself into, was what he was wondering. But it is definitely, the worst ones are on his property. He has a section, sometimes we sneak in along the creek that I'm sure you've seen in some of the episodes. And there's just loose rock. And so it's like you're walking in at 5 o'clock in the morning, trying to be quiet while balancing on loose rock. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's always the challenge in trying to not find every stick in the woods. But he is I don't know. He's
well, he's a timber ninja, is it?
But yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Todd,
and really, I think.
Go ahead.
Well, I was saying, really big. I think a big part of that is just the biggest thing that we do is just take our time. You know, leaving early enough to allow us plenty of time to get there without having to run through the woods to get there. You know, just take your time and just ease in. And I think that's the big part of trying to limit your noise and as much as you can.
Speaking of limiting noise and things of that nature, you have a bag full of stuff, and you're the camera guy, and many of us now are packing all the camera stuff in, and a third angle camera and a wireless mic and all that stuff. What's in Kyle Reenders' bag that may not be in other folks' bags that you think is a valuable tool that maybe some people would overlook?
I'll just kind of go through and see if something comes to my mind, but I'll go through what's in my bag typically. Yeah. And so for the last couple of years, I have been using a DSLR camera, which I would not advise unless you really want to dive into it. And especially if you're self-filming, that's just it. They can be tricky to film with. But so So at this point, I go in, I have one camera that has the longer lens on it that I use for zooming in on the deer and doing that sort of stuff, and then another camera that I use for when we're doing interviews and all that sort of thing that I will just hang from the tree on a little hook when I'm not using it. So, 2 cameras and a mic, and then adding, a GoPro type camera for another angle to always, get that secondary angle is cool. That's the thing, like, as I think about, what makes it different. I had a teacher in high school in photography class that, talked about how you could take some of the best photos with a disposable camera. If anyone remembers what those are, which I don't necessarily think is true, but I think the sentiment is true, that it is not the caliber of the equipment that you have. It is the eye and the being creative with that equipment that makes more of a difference. And that's not to say that if you have some really good equipment, you can get some really cool stuff. But to me, I think just getting the different angles and just thinking creatively is more important than spending money on tons of great gear.
You can have all the gear in the world, but if you don't have the eye, and speaking of having the eye, what is that something that you would say that's a learned trait, or is that something that's inherently in you?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I don't know. You got to be careful there, because I think there's definitely aspects that you can learn about, videography and photography and that sort of thing, and apply it to when you're filming and videoing. But I do think there is a part of kind of having an eye to get those different angles and different shots and stuff that kind of, at least for me, comes naturally to me. And so I think it's a little bit of both worlds. And obviously there's a continuing to learn. Even if you have the eye, you're not going to be just great all of a sudden. You got to continue to learn and apply. It's probably a matter of how much you got to work at it. You know what I mean? Like, I think if there's people, I play some instruments. And so I think of a friend who just kind of picked up a guitar and just started playing. But then other people got to work harder at it, and it doesn't come as easy. So I would kind of compare it to that, if that makes sense as an analogy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm not good at either of those, so I don't feel any better about myself. But
sorry,
but thanks. Yeah, well, it's not about me, as my 6-year-old informed me tonight. It's not about you, Jason. It's not about you. I'm like, okay. Thanks for letting me know. And I told her, I'm like, that I may have told you this already, but I said, Chloe, it is about me. And she's like, no, it's not. It's about God. And I'm like, okay, all right. That's cheating. That's all completely right. Cheating.
Just got schooled by a 6-year-old.
Right, exactly. I did. I just got owned.
That's awesome.
One of the things that you said in this last couple minutes here is not a DSLR. Well, everyone and their brother and sister wants to use a DSLR. Why? And then why should you not get one?
Well, I think everyone and their brother and their sister too want a DSLR, because you can get that cinematic look, and that has really just blown up over the last, I would say, 5 years in the hunting industry. And really,
are we talking like Heartland bow hunter type stuff?
Yeah, definitely. And so what you get with that is you have a bigger sensor, and I won't get too geeky on you, but what that allows you to do is get greater depth of field. So that means, less depth of field versus, some of the other video cameras. And what that does is that creates just kind of a look where, just like if I'm looking at you, where just the front of your face will be in focus, and then everything behind you is just completely blurred out of focus. And so I think that is what people are going after. And it's a double-edged sword, because if you think about a video camera, you have, and this is not, specific numbers. I'm just going to make some numbers up right now. But if I'm videoing a scene with you, And in a standard video camera where you have a smaller sensor, I'm going to have you, and then I'm going to have 20 feet behind you that's going to be in focus. So you can see a lot that's in focus. Whereas if I have a DSLR and I have a faster lens, I'm going to see you and then nothing. So that looks really cool, but that is also 100 times more harder to get you exactly in focus. So I guess what I'm trying to say there's a lot more leeway in some of the other video cameras and non-DSLRs. And so that is the tricky part. That's the tricky part, as I say, you said, why would you not get a DSLR? But for me, I think the biggest thing is not taking one into the woods. You look at all these shows that have DSLRs now, but everyone's still pretty much filming, whenever they're filming a deer, it's with a bigger video camera and not a DSLR. I'm going to say that I'm the only person I know that uses a DSLR, but I don't really know anyone. I don't really know too many other people in the hunting industry, so it's not really a fair comparison. But and that's the biggest thing too. It's just when you have those 30 seconds when the deer comes in, and you got to be right on. There's no margin for error. It's really just being confident in your ability to get the shot, I guess. And I don't. Does that sound? I don't want to sound braggy or anything like that, because I don't want to be like that. But that's not what I mean by that. But it's just your I guess really for me, just having done it for the last 10 years and gotten used to it and continuing to learn and chase and practice and do all that.
Essentially what you're saying is it's a heck of a lot easier and more forgiving to use a 4K camera or a 1080p HD, camera. They're just plain more forgiving.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, 4K doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it, because there's a lot of DSLRs that are 4K. But yeah, if you think about, if you go even smaller, you think about like a little GoPro. Everything's in focus when you're shooting with a GoPro. And so really, right, the more you step it up, the less that's in focus, the less forgiving it is.
Well, I'm going to hop back in our conversation just a little bit, and ask a question. You said you use two cameras. Does that mean you have two camera arms up there? Or are you just swapping cameras on and off camera arms?
No, what I do...
Camera arm.
And really this is just the last year that I started this. But I really love the way that it worked and the results that I got with it. And so I have my telephoto lens, which is a 40 to 150, 80 to 300, and a 35 millimeter equivalent. And I'll stop being a nerd now. But and so what that does is that's able to punch in and zoom in right on the deer. But the problem with that is it doesn't zoom out far enough to get a shot with you when I want to do your interview. And so that's why I added the second camera that has another zoom lens that's wider. And so that is just hanging on a hook, and I grab it, and it's wide enough that I can handhold it in the tree and get the interview shots, because it's nice. A lot of times you're in a tree, so you just lean into a tree and hold it, and you can get a pretty steady shot. And so that's kind of the system that I've developed over the last year that I think is worked great. Is there any type of bag that you use to transport your stuff? How do you keep two cameras from clanking around and hitting each other in a backpack and things of that nature? Or do you typically just have one out because you're filming on the way in? How does that work? Or I suppose you have to have the room for two because you're sometimes walking in the dark. Yeah, and so what I had to think for a second what I did, but so I have just a soft, I don't know, it's probably 8 inches around and then 12 inches is long, and bag that I throw the bigger camera in. And then it's got a side pocket that you throw the wireless mics, extra batteries, extra SD cards, because you never want to go out in the woods without that. There was actually a time when I had to switch out SD cards when the rusty nail was like 30 yards from us. No, that was a battery that I had to switch out, which is worse than an SD card. But oh my goodness, anyway, really? Well, and that was the time that he spooked on us. And so we were up and so he was bedded, maybe it was, I don't know, 50 yards from us or something. And so I'm constantly filming and I'm like, okay, my battery's dying. I got to switch this, because if he makes a move, like, that's the last thing I want, is him to come in and then get that little light starting to blink. And so, so I swapped it out, and then he came in, and later on he came in, and that was when he busted. He didn't swap me when I was doing the battery change, thankfully. But other than that, then what I've done most of the time, every afternoon, like when we're going in the afternoon, the camera's out, and that kind of forces you to, you're like, you got the camera out, I'm carrying it, might as well shoot some stuff on the way in. And then like in the morning, I have on the top of my pack, there's just a bigger pouch that I just throw my camera in. It's small enough with a smaller lens on it that I just throw it in, like a warm winter hat to kind of cover it, and just throw it in there. And that's how I get that in.
Cool. Okay. And have you ever had to pack in a stand with Todd when you guys are doing a run and gun set? For those guys that are listening, or gals that are listening, that are filming themselves, they're packing in a run and gun set with a lone wolf and sticks. And is there anything that you use, or you've had to use, or haven't you really had to do that because you're just typically videoing Todd?
Well, typically I never really have to pack sticks in, but there's a number of times where I'm packing my own stand in. And so got a backpack and then the lone wolf stand on top of that. And yeah.
So the lone wolf stand goes over top of your backpack.
Yeah. So usually what I do is throw my backpack on, that's got everything in it. And then the lone wolf goes on top, and sometimes the camera arm gets strapped to the lone wolf, or the camera base, I should say, the camera base gets strapped to that as we go into.
What kind of camera arm do you use?
We have been using one that Todd designed. Oh goodness, probably 9 years ago. We were using another one, and it wasn't cutting it. We had I'm trying to remember the name of that buck. We had an encounter with a big buck that we had been chasing. I think it was the first year, late season, and I just couldn't get the camera around to get on him, and it just wasn't cutting it. So he, and his engineering skill and his connections with, some of the different materials that he's made, he just designed one and had it made. And so that's what we are currently using. But I have used, all sorts of them over the years too.
Neat. I've seen that one that he has, and it definitely looks like it. If anything, it's over-engineered, which is what you'd expect from Todd.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's over-engineered, but it definitely looks like it could stand up to the test. What's the most memorable time for you that you can remember Todd either freaking out on you for doing something wrong, or freaking out because of a situation, or just plain freaking out because he's happy? What comes to mind? Give us the dirt.
Well, obviously, I think emphasize the highs and lows of hunting, because this hunting thing, it's a roller coaster. As anyone knows who spent time, you've been hunting and you're just down and you're like, okay, I'm going to just get rid of everything and throw in the towel. And then 5 minutes later, the buck walks by. But, there was a time when early on, when we had a property that we were going to hunt, and we got there and there were some new, no trespassing signs that were put up. And it turns out that someone else I don't know if they had leased the property or had gotten the property, and so we weren't allowed to go on that property, and that was kind of, one of the lows. And then I think the one that jumps out the most is Barry Sanders, when he freaked out after he shot Barry Sanders, just because that was a buck that he had been chasing for years and years and had so much history with it, that was just a cool moment to be able to be there and be part of, sealing the deal on him.
A lot of people have asked me, is that really what he's like? And I, at first, I haven't spent that much time with Todd, or hadn't spent that much time with Todd. And at first I'm like, I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you now, and I'm sure you can speak to this better than I can, that's really Todd. I mean, that's not him overreacting or being ridiculous. That's just his emotion. Is that right?
Yeah, no, definitely. That is not, there's no acting going on there. That's just his personality, coming out, which that's just the way he is, I guess, naturally.
And certainly with anybody, and me included, there's good and bad with everybody. But one of the things that I've learned to love about Todd is his passion for whatever it is that he's doing. And I think you'd agree with that, wouldn't you? Yeah,
definitely. That's definitely, I think, something that comes across, and he just kind of puts it how it is. And
yeah, it's that way with hunting, with the way he approaches hunting. It's that way with who we choose to be sponsored by. There's offers at times that we're just not interested in, or things that I brought up that he just he's not willing to even consider because it's just not him, and I appreciate that about him. But again, like I said, that's a question I get asked: is there really that much emotion? And I'm like, yeah, there really is. If you could see him, in his passion for what he does, he's just letting it all out.
Yeah, I am 99% sure if I was not in the tree with him, he would still be doing and acting that same way. And you see that now when he's self-filming. There's still that same reaction as there is. Whether he's in front of a camera or not, I don't think it really matters.
I guess one thing that I've always wanted to know, and then I'll let you get going here, is, this year we've got a team of, let's say, probably a dozen people, and you get inundated with a lot of times just garbage. And through that garbage, you sift through and you find the diamonds, I'll call them. Is that the hardest part of what you do? Or would you say, finding that artistic, creative shot when you're filming is harder than editing and piecing together a good story for someone else when you weren't there to live that story with them like you are with Todd? What's harder?
I would definitely say, putting some of the stories together, especially, I think sorry, excuse me. I think of, editing in like stages. And so the first stage, when you're going through all the raw footage and trying to say, okay, I'm going to whittle it down to this. And for me, it's kind of, editing is very much, I've never done this, but it's like chiseling a statue is how I would see it. So you start off with this just chunk of raw material. And so then you go and you say, okay, I want this out of here. And so you're knocking this off. And then you step back and say, you look at the video and you say, okay, all right, that's got to come out. I got to take that out and cut that out. And it's just this constant process of going through, cutting stuff out, going back and saying, okay, the story, we could shorten this up. We can make this tighter. We can, get rid of that, until you finally have the finished piece, the finished cut that you are going after.
Interesting. Okay. I've always wondered how, there's, I don't know how many hours of video that I've sent you over the course of the 9 years that I've been involved with White Knuckle, but it's got to be approaching 100, for sure, I'd say. And I've often wondered how in heaven's name do you sift through all that stuff? Because, from our standpoint, the guys at the other end, we're always thinking, well, I don't want to not send it to him because maybe he sees something in there that I don't. So at times, you feel almost guilty because we feel like we're tasking you with a whole bunch of unnecessary, tasks. But at the same time, it may make or not break, but it could make or break a particular segment of the story. So that's always a tough balancing act, and it's got to be equally as tough for you when you're doing the edit to dump some stuff and to keep some stuff. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that I think I've gotten I think it's come more easier because I've seen the process and I can kind of see the vision of where I need to go. So it's a little easier for me to just cut things versus when I first started. I was like, well, we might need that later. And so when you think of, I always call it trimming the fat, when you can go in and take stuff out that you don't need. And then the other expression, when you get down to especially when we were doing DVDs and it was like we had 2 hours to tell these stories, we'd have to go in and trim muscle. We'd have to cut stuff out. I'm like, that's a good story, but we got to cut this down. It's either that or that. So that's got to go. And so it ends up on the floor. And really a cool part about, doing the web show and just even being able to put a 2-minute video on Facebook has been being able to have some smaller clips that would have never done anything before be seen by people, and just there's a 2-minute clip or a 1-minute clip that was a cool little part of the story that doesn't really relate to something else, but now it can be shared and now it can be seen by him.
One of the things that for me, knowing you and knowing Todd for the last 9 years, going on 10, is that you guys seem to have a pretty clear vision since day one. And that vision was to tell not just the story of a deer getting killed, but really to a documentary style show that showed all the aspects of hunting, not just the hunt itself, but all the aspects of hunting. Would you say that that's been easy to see through year in and year out and really not deviate from that? And is that what's kept you interested in this project?
Well, and I do think that's been a part of it. And the word I like to use is, we're just making documentaries about hunting. And so if you think about the amount of time that you're in the woods that you kill a deer versus the amount of time you're actually in the woods, I mean, shouldn't the videos reflect that? And I think that was kind of our idea, really Todd's idea that I helped to implement, and really just making it more, I think our first DVD title says it all, Beyond the Kill, because it is really more than that. And that's something that we've continued to strive after and chase after and really share in all our DVDs and our web shows.
When Todd and you get together for that first time, how is it that he described exactly what it is that he wanted to accomplish? Because I would bet that the way you describe it is going to be the way that I would see it today. I'm just curious how he came to you and sort of laid out his vision for this project and then, ultimately got you involved.
Yeah. And I think really it was, and when we first got together, that summer, and when I went down for that scouting trip, and he kind of told me what he wanted to do, and just talking about making a hunting video that was different. And for me, I didn't really watch hunting videos at that point, so I didn't have a reference of anything to be different about. But what I knew was making films and telling stories. And so really, when he told me, okay, so we're going to focus on not just the kills, we're going to focus on the hunts, why are we hunting where we're at, telling the whole story, what happened earlier in the day, what's going on now, what's the wind doing, really spilling and diving into the mind of the hunter, and really where we've grown, even in the last number of years is trying to teach what we've learned over the years, and share that with other people as well.
That's one of the things that I think that sets us apart is Todd's desire and ultimately our desire collectively as a group to share our knowledge. I always tell people and listen, I don't bring a whole bunch to the table when it comes to, whitetail tactics and techniques. I'll leave that to Todd and the Dan Infolts of the world and all the other folks that we talk to. I'm just kind of along for the ride. But it's definitely, something that I recognize, and that's that Todd isn't trying to talk down to anyone. He's not trying to tell you everything he knows. He's just trying to share with you what he knows. And I think it's so much easier for people to stomach stuff like that when they hear it in that format. And I think that's, one of the things that's made it unique. All right. Anything else?
Well, and I would, the first thing that jumps out to my mind is Ozonics. If I think back to I think 5-6 years we've been using Ozonics now. Can't remember exactly, but I think if I think back to the pre-Ozonics days, and I think back to all the times we got snorted at, and you guys know how it goes. You're sitting in a tree and you're like, the doe starts coming and you're like, don't go that way. Don't go down that way, because that's where my wind is blowing. And she gets downwind and then starts raising her nose, starts stomping the foot, and then it's not long before there's a snort. And you're like, well, okay, might as well pack things up. I think we're done here. And so really the first year when we started using the Ozonics, and you could see deer get downwind of you, and you know, and a lot of times they'll smell that and they'll be like, what is that? You know, and they don't know quite what it is. They definitely can sense it, but it's not human to them. And so it doesn't freak them out. And in some cases, it even makes them almost curious. I mean, we've had deer and had bucks that actually come closer, I think, because they smell the Ozonics and they want to come figure it out. They want to come figure out what it is. And so that really has been a game changer. I think just the ability to have a doe come in and walk downwind and not snort and blow the hunt out has really impacted our hunts. And not to say that we just say, don't worry about the wind. We still are conscious about the wind and, you know, trying to play that and all that sort of thing. But it gives you that extra element, you know. In one of the stands that we filmed a buck out of this year, you're in a bottom, and so like it's just constantly the wind shifting and swirling and going this way. It's supposed to be blowing the other way, and it's not. And it really just gives you that extra edge against the ultimate, you know, their nose that you can't beat otherwise.
Yeah, you've gotten to witness it on more than one occasion. I mean, you've been party to sitting there using the milkweed seeds and floating them right to the deer. You've captured a lot of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's some of the cool, you know, some of the cool footage that we've been able to capture is, you know, the Ozonics where Todd's throwing those and you can see him and you're zooming right in along with them and it goes right to the deer. And you're like, okay, there's no doubt that our wind is blowing right there. And not to say that they don't ever sense anything, because a lot of times they'll stop and they'll smell it, but then they'll just mosey on it like nothing ever happened, versus, you know, snorting and booking off and running away. You know, they remain calm and they just keep going on with where they were going.
Definitely been a game changer, I think. I would agree with that 100%. Well, there you have it. Our conversation with Kyle Reenders, our chief producer, editor, cook, bottle washer, everything. Not our typical white knuckle podcast, but one that definitely we wanted to do just to give Kyle a bit of a voice and answer some of the folks' questions that we've received over the course of the last 3 or 4 months about either what it takes to produce an actual show or what a cameraman does, all the different things that Kyle talked about. So we appreciate Kyle taking the time, in addition to everything else that he does for us. We appreciate him taking the time to go ahead and talk to us about everything that is White Knuckle Productions. We're getting close to the end of our time for this week. Before we let you go, I just wanted to remind any of you who listen to the podcast regularly, if you have not given us a review, please do so on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. Any of those places will have a spot for you to give us a review. Reviews are how we get better at what it is that we do. If you're new to this whole game and you're listening on an Apple device, grab your device and go to the iTunes store and search for White Knuckle Podcast. This will help you to download the free podcast app that's produced by Apple. Then you can subscribe to our show and give us a review. And every time I produce a new episode, you will get it downloaded to your device. For Android listeners, download the Stitcher app. That's also free. And search again for White Knuckle Podcast. And that will allow you, after you subscribe to it, to get our show downloaded every time that we produce it. With that, I'll close out the show for today. I just want to remind everyone, as a loyal listener of the White Knuckle Podcast, you're entitled to a 15% discount on Ozonics gear, totaling $3.99 or more. All you have to do is sign up for an account. When you're checking out, sign up for an account and then put in the coupon code WKP 2017. That's WKP 2017, and you will be entitled to 15% off any order that's $3.99 or more. So thank you for Ozonics and their commitment to this whole process and the White Knuckle podcast. We certainly appreciate their belief in us and the product that it is we're putting out, and we certainly hope you do. Again, if you do or if you don't, give us a review. We'll know how to get better. If you have any ideas for a show, be sure to place them on our social media feed, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, or on Facebook. I think that's all I've got for this week. We're about 20 days out from the Wisconsin bow hunting season, so I'm getting pretty jacked about that, and not too far off from the rest of your season starting, and some of them are starting here in the next week and a half. So good luck to all of you. Make sure you wear your harness, and that's all I've got. Jason out.